Welcome again to another edition of the forum. I'm very happy to have Jason and Anthony with me here again. We're going to talk about U.S. foreign policy. The question is this more kind of imperialism, or do we just see sort of standard classic Realpolitik? For those of you who know us also from Substack, from the cable, we already announced that we're going to move the forum primarily to YouTube. I'm just going to say a couple of things before we get started with the discussion about what we're trying to do. The forum essentially has two goals. First, it is supposed to provide you with sort of informed positions on particular issues in public life. So today we're going to do U.S. foreign policy. Next time we're going to do U.S. immigration. And we want to talk about AI and the role it is playing in our lives. So that's the first goal. And the second goal is to sort of showcase or to give an example of how we can respectfully and democratically deliberate about issues that are often contentious. We think that's sort of very important in our day and time. So yes, without that and without further ado, I guess let's dive right in. So we're gonna do the discussion as follows. We will first start trying to figure out what exactly we mean by imperialism and realpolitik, but without like extending that into an hour-long academic discussion. And then we're gonna get to the actual sort of theaters of foreign policy engagement in the last couple of months: Iran, Venezuela, Greenland, and Ukraine. So within this entire discussion, there are two things I want to say up front, which have been mentioned in the article already as well, that you can read on the cable on Substack. So first of all, when we explain, let's say, the foreign policy motive or the foreign policy actions of a particular state or government or leader, that means we try to understand, not justify those actions, right? So that's a very important distinction that's often getting lost. I think more often than not, it's intentionally being papered over. So we're here to explain and understand foreign policy, U.S. foreign policy, not to say that it's morally justified, right? And we can maybe say a couple of words about the moral dimension of all of that, but that's not the primary goal here. Second, we will take opposing views at times, and as I explained in the article, we will often engage in what's called the steelman argument. So instead of the straw man argument, we try to make the opponent's position as strong as possible and then criticize it, because we think that's sort of the basic idea of a fair debate. So yes, let's get started. I spent a little time thinking about it. Imperialism. Anthony and I, we all have some political science background, but Anthony and I have sort of taught or are teaching, in the case of Anthony, in the field of international relations. I used to teach at Ohio State. Anthony, let me ask you, how would you define imperialism? Because I still find it complicated.
Good question. So I think imperialism there's maybe levels to how to think about it. One, I think the general idea that people have about imperialism is that some state enters or exploits or takes another state, another territory for economic gain. I think that's maybe the standard idea. And there's a long history of imperialism, imperialism is a really weird concept, because there was a time when it was kind of like 100 years ago, and in Europe, it was like positively thought of. Like there's some people who are like, oh, we're imperialists, and people and that kind of bled into some of U.S. circles too. Like being an empire and being imperialist wasn't necessarily a bad thing. But and then there's also, I think, maybe the critical side of imperialism comes from the Marxists, and the Marxists are gonna the Marxist theory, Marxist politicians and so on, people like Lenin, they argue that it's not necessarily states doing things; it's states serving economic actors. So that could be industrial actors, could be financial actors, could be in what I mentioned, industrial, finance, mercantile. So in this case, it could be banks, could be oil companies, if we're going to talk about Venezuela and so on. Could be all those actors, whether separate or together. They then push political actors. Like this is the crucial thing with imperialism, is that states are doing things, but the real motor are economic interests. Not the state is following the lead of economic actors, which are promoting or pushing politicians to do things. So like the state is not autonomous. There's no state interest, or rather, if there's state interests, it's economic interests to make money, to profit from capitalist relations. That's how I would boil it down.
Okay, so basically, it's a relationship of dominance, and the goal is economic exploitation, in primarily. Jason, you want to add anything to that? I mean, economics is sort of your part.
Well, I mean, when I think about it, it's like, well, one is like, if you're a middle power, I'm not sure that you make a big distinction between like imperialism and or realpolitik, because when you're voluntold to do something, it feels a lot like imperialism. And I guess the other thing is like you can have, I guess maybe I'm not understanding this correctly, but like it feels to me like imperialism is just like a tool, right? You can have like a realpolitik kind of like broad strategy and be like, okay, imperialism is the kind of tool that we're going to use to obtain our sort of state interest or what have you, versus, I don't know, colonialism or something else. Because it's kind of like a throwback to when before the Industrial Revolution, where you basically, the way you increased your national power was just land and people, right? Like the Roman Empire, the Chinese empires, et cetera, et cetera. So.
Okay, well, I really like on the first point you made, because I was thinking about maybe we didn't choose the title so cleverly after all, because imperialism and Realpolitik, they are looking very similar to, depending on where you stand, right? So if you're a smaller or middle power, it's like it doesn't really help you much that the motives might be slightly different in the one case or the other. You're still being sort of dominated.
But there's a little bit more to imperialism than that. It's not just domination. Like, so it depends again which kind of schools or theories you go with. But like the Marxists, like it's like to also establish like ongoing relationships of dependence. So I can give you an example. Like Iraq, like Marxists are going to say the Iraq war was an imperialist war. Why? The US was involved, yes, but really it was oil companies, Chevron. They wanted to invest. And what did they want to then invest? They wanted to get the oil, but it's not just getting oil, it's establishing an unequal relationship where Iraq will now pump crude oil to the United States for how long? Forever. And we will drive our cars. Consumers will benefit, because by having processed oil that's refined in other places, not in Iraq, or if it's processed in Iraq, it'll be sent to places in Europe and the United States. Consumers will not see the violence going on or the pollution or anything else. And what will happen to Iraq? It will stay poor. It will stay subordinate to European and US interests. It's that's imperialism. It's not just like one, you're done. It's establishing that asymmetrical relationship and perpetuating it as long as possible.
Okay. No, this is great. I think this is a very clear explanation of sort of the Marxist perspective on imperialism, and I think that's good. So we have something to work with. I mean, historically, imperialism, speaking as a German, right, was also a lot about prestige of government leaders. So they just felt like they had to have an empire, so they scrambled for territory in Africa, right, which was just ill-conceived. But all right, I think this is good. And I think that the Marxist definition helps us also distinguish it a bit more from Realpolitik. I would take a stab at that now, and because one of the first sort of well, we came up with this forum because I had thought about writing an op-ed piece when the actions in Venezuela happened. And I was going to argue that this basically shows that Donald Trump's foreign policy is basically one-to-one a perfect example of offensive realism, which is sort of one particular articulation of Realpolitik. And it's a nice segue because Mearsheimer once said in class that the Marxists always loved him because, and they always invited him to conferences because what they all agreed on was that power really mattered, right? And that's actually a good starting point. So I'm gonna boil it down to the most essential. So this is not gonna be an IR theory discussion here, which we wouldn't be interested in anyway. But Mearsheimer actually, I do cite him because there's a long history of thinkers who have sort of been influential in shaping the idea of Realpolitik. There's Machiavelli, obviously there's Thomas Hobbes, there's Bismarck in sort of the more practical affairs. John Mearsheimer is basically, I think the accomplishment that he can be credited with is that he distilled the sort of the essence of realism in international politics to the most simple possible way. And it is actually quite simple. The issue of international politics, and that's making international politics difficult and frustrating, especially when you live in a rather well-established state like the United States or Germany, is that there is no world government. Right, so Mearsheimer always said that if you dial 911 in international politics, no one's going to answer your call, right? And that creates certain problems because as a state, let's say the United States, you are responsible for the security of your citizens, and you're constantly basically worried that some other state might come along, let's call it China, just for the sake of argument. And so you have an interest in always being on your guard. And this gets worse because you never really know what the true intentions is of the Chinese or the Russians or whoever else might come up. And since, again, there's no government to adjudicate conflict, you basically try to become the most powerful state in your region, ideally in the world. And this basically creates a situation where states are, first of all, afraid of one another. Second of all, they will sort of resort to self-help, right? So they make alliances with other states, but only as long as it serves their interest. And they will seek power. They will seek to maximize power, and that means economic power in order to increase their military power. And even population is sort of an issue in that regard. Jason is always looking at demographic issues because they are very important in that regard. So this is basically the crux of the theory. What happens then over time, and that's getting a bit more into the details of the theory, is you see sort of balances of power emerge across the globe, or you have a case where there's two powers, like in the Cold War, there was the Soviet Union and the United States, or you have a unipolar moment, which is the title of an article, after the end of the Cold War, where people were basically saying the United States is the only big superpower. The one thing that's interesting, I think, for our discussion is, and why I thought Venezuela was sort of a perfect case of that behavior, is also Mearsheimer makes this argument, which some people have, I think, with some justification, called a bit fishy, is there's the stopping power of water, right? So historically, it's actually very true, right? The UK is very hard to conquer. Why? Because there's this big moat, call it the Channel. The United States has never been conquered from outside. and it has two oceans on its side. Germany, on the other hand, has always been a security problem in Europe once it became Germany, because it was such a big country in the center, surrounded by all these other countries. So there was always this power dynamic was always creating conflict. So, well, I will say more about this when we get to the case of Venezuela. And yes, I will leave it at that. I have another take on realism. Anything to add, guys?
I mean, I think if you want to understand a lot of like the Trump administration's policy, I suggest two things. One is just like stop treating Trump as kind of like this force of nature, because then it's just like oh, stuff happens. Trump does stuff and stuff happens. When like in reality, like the United States government is a large beast, right? Like Trump is only one dude. He can't do everything. So fundamentally, like there is like a bureaucracy behind him. And like there's a book by Elbridge Colby called Strategy of Denial. I haven't finished it yet because it's pretty dry reading, but it does lay out kind of like the thought process, and you can kind of see aspects of it. The fundamental core concept is that like, look, we just need to deny like regional hegemony to like any one power. This is not like new, right? Like Russia's demonstrated very, very clearly that like it can't overrun Ukraine. It's not overrunning Europe, right? So our problem is China. And this is all Colby's argument. So the idea is that, okay, fine, we'll clean up like basically the home neighborhood, use that as a base, and then kind of like block out the first island chain, right? And that way we can kind of like, the goal is not to like, you know, like start a new Cold War per se, but like, you know, the whole like compete or whatever, but it's just to deny China like regional hegemony. Because if we lose East Asia, we basically lose like everything else, because that's where the crux of like global growth is going to be for the next couple of decades.
I would add something quick. Just if we run from it's funny that you mentioned like the realists and the Marxists coming together, because I think you can see them doing that. And I think you have people, other thinkers, Robert Cohen is another international relations person who kind of just like lumps Marxism even with realism in some things. But I think a real Marxist perspective disputes the idea of global governance, because it doesn't matter. There is global governance. It's capitalism. It's a global market. It has been a global market in different forms since 1492. Really, it's taken different shapes. It's engaged in different forms of extraction and creating hierarchies. The UN just serves business interests. That has different fractions, like I said, industrial, mercantile or merchant, and financial. So the UN is just, these people are just puppets. They don't matter that much. We are obsessed with it. We watch it and we're like, the US just pulled out of the Human Rights Council. Oh my gosh, what does that mean? It means nothing. That's what a Marxist would say.
All right. Well, actually, I mean, and this is where the similarities are again, right? People like offensive realists, they are the tougher, maybe, no. Offensive realists or realists in general would say the UN doesn't matter either. It's epiphenomenal, right? You can have the UN and it's nice, but it's just sort of nice to have. And the moment things get real, we drop the whole thing. And international, and the same goes, and this is an important one, I think. The same goes for international law. International law is nice to have, and it does regulate a lot of things, and it actually makes it easier for other states to sort of have combined. So stabilize the expectations about each other's behavior. But when it comes down to it, then the big ones, the big states are just going to override international law. And Venezuela obviously was not legal. Bombing Iran wasn't necessary. It doesn't even matter, right? So whenever there is something in the news, something like, Venezuela, and people are like, oh, but it's violating international law, then I just have to chuckle a little bit, because it's like, yes, well, in the first place, it was created by the superpowers, and then they are also at liberty and do this all the time to violate it, right? But I do like, I very much, because I think we'll all agree on that one, and I think that's a very important point. I really like, I think it's already the sentence of the night, but we still have a couple of minutes. Trump's only one dude. I think that's a very good line, right? In the case of the Marxist scenario, it doesn't even matter if it's the U.S. government, because that is also just a puppet of a larger sort of international elite, basically, that's running things from behind. And there are examples for that, and there's pieces of evidence here. Maybe not that they're all sitting in one sort of like dark room and sort of are hatching plans, but it's sort of, this is the logic of the system, and this is how the system operates. But realists, especially like in international relations, would also say that, yeah, Trump is just one dude. He does make a difference maybe at times, but there's a bunch of people behind him, other interests that he doesn't fully control, but that control the policy of the United States of America, right? Jason, you want to follow up on that?
The only thing I would say about the UN is that, like, I think also we fundamentally misunderstand like what the UN, maybe it's just because the UN markets itself as kind of like this like global government, but like I think of like the UN, like it serves two major purposes. One is like for smaller countries who don't have like the bankroll of like the EU, United States to open embassies across the world. It acts as a form where they can have diplomatic debate, and secondly, it's there to prevent great power conflict. Right? That's literally it. That's it. Just like if it could do that, then that's good, because world wars are bad, right? Like, I mean, like if it does that, you know, it's not, maybe call it the United Nations isn't the right title. Maybe it's like overselling what it is, but like if it does those two things, then
I think there's another thing to add about the UN. I mean, not if we're, I mean, from a different perspective, but like it's, yeah, international law is broken, and that's bad. That's like these international institutions, they have constitutions, and they're aspiring documents. Laws are broken all the time. Like, so if people are murdered in the street, you don't go, yeah, murder happens, too bad. You say, no, it shouldn't happen. And so we should do things to stop it, right? And so wars happen. We don't go, yep, wars happen. We go, wars shouldn't happen. So some are going to say institutions exist so that we have like essentially in the least like norms and principles that we aspire to. We want justice. Read the preamble to the UN. Like, it's like, we want peace. Peace isn't just simply, it depends again what you think. Is it the absence of conflict, or is it talk, dialogue, democracy, trade, all those things, which are processes that take years and years and years to develop? So that's another part, you know?
Yes. No, and I would agree with Jason that yes, the UN, I mean, the Security Council, and we don't want to get too technical with the discussion, but the Security Council were the five great powers from after World War II, basically had the veto power. That's sort of trying to, the architecture already shows the attempt to find a way to have to prevent great power war, because it would be so deadly, especially in the nuclear age. Though Mearsheimer, other realists would also say that what has prevented great power war in that sense would have been nuclear weapons, the deterrent factor of nuclear weapons. But maybe we'll leave this for our next topic, for the first case, which is Iran. But one thing about international laws, and yes, I will now take off my realist hat for a moment, is that yes, it exists, and there is an aspiration in it, and I think that's still important, even if we can be very cynical about world politics, right? So people do call on international law. There are principles encoded that are encoded in our national constitutions and basic laws. We don't have a constitution, all right? So I wouldn't say they are as, I would disagree with realists that they're completely unimportant or irrelevant, right? But they don't have sort of the force that U.S. carrier group has. And that might be unfortunate, but that doesn't mean that it cannot change in that direction. And I do want to throw out another perspective, because I actually used to be not known as the realist, but more as constructivism. And I want to throw it out because my friend Max and I, we had a discussion in a bar in Cologne last Friday, and he made that argument. He was so upset about Trump And everybody's, of course, upset about Trump. But he was upset because he was like, these actions, like with Venezuela, they basically create a world where realism is right. Right? So realism, this is an important difference. Realism is based on the idea that the world is that way. It's always been that way. It will always be that way. Constructivists like Alex Wendt would say, no, it depends on how we interact with one another over time, right? So after World War II, let's say Germany, my big case, the reason I studied international politics, right? I always wondered, how is it that a state that has started 2 world wars can become one of the most peaceful and prosperous states in the world? The Marxist has a different answer than mine, but you could say first there was military power, but then relations became very friendly, and the US and Germany have become friends, so that I can now wear a shirt that says transatlantic, right? This is sort of the constructivist perspective. Things can grow out. We can get out of this realist world. I think, I'm not sure how that works in the, well, I know how it works in the Marxist world as well. That would be revolution. But I just want to throw that perspective out because I think it's an important one, that there's still, yeah, realism paints the world as if it is really like that. And that's not necessarily, it's hard to prove. That's what I'm going to say.
We can aspire to better things, I think, is like, just because the world is like that, right? I mean, like, we develop medicines. We don't have to die of like malaria and other various bits and pieces, but
if I'm going to defend the realists, they're going to say, yeah, but if you have your head in your clouds, you're going to be taken advantage of. Let's abolish war. Let's abolish the police. Let's abolish all these things that have a great world. And then it's like, you know what? There's somebody out there. I had a professor of mine when I was in Madison, University of Wisconsin-Madison. He said, oh, you want peace, you want justice, you want all this stuff, you want to love your neighbor. Do you lock your door at night? You do. Do you lock your car when you go in the store? Let me tell you, you do. Why? Because you don't trust people. Because at the end of the day, you're worried that people are going to rob you or they're going to steal your stuff, because that happens. So,
and to add like
on the street, no, it's okay.
I was just saying, like, to add like another feather to like the realist cap. I mean, like, I don't find the entire argument that like, oh no, America violated the norms, now Putin and like Xi are free to do whatever they want. I don't think that factors into their calculation, because clearly, like, the invasion of Ukraine happened well before we did Venezuela, right? And Xi Jinping is not waiting for like, oh, finally, the Americans did something illegal, blatantly violating international law, so that we can violate, like we can do Taiwan. One, because Taiwan, they view Taiwan as an internal affair, right? It's literally like a breakaway problem. It's like, there is no international law, like, it's ours. So it's like, I don't, that argument doesn't seem to fly with me, or it doesn't work.
All right, I see that we could easily do this entire hour just on that theory discussion, which would be fun actually, but we'll take it, actually make it a bit more real. Well, two still theoretical points is Ukraine and Russia and Taiwan and China and the United States and Venezuela actually do show that, and that's again with the realist hat on, that geography really matters, right? And that's something that I've had in many discussions with people. I had to sort of explain it, and it's because sometimes it's just not that obvious. But for Russia, Ukraine is existential because it's right there at the border, right? And I know people don't share that argument, but I would say that Putin also is there. The motivation is first and foremost security. He cannot accept NATO at the doorstep, just like the United States couldn't accept Russian nuclear warheads on Cuba. And the thing about China and Taiwan is the same. China, for reasons that we might or might not understand, thinks that Taiwan is part of its territory, its nation. And the issue with us is that if we want to deter China, we are not credible, because Taiwan is right there and we are very far away. And to actually tell somebody who really cares so deeply about something like China about Taiwan, or Russia, about Ukraine, that we go to war and potentially nuclear war over that island or that part of the Ukrainian territory is just not credible. So this is my segue in to a really brief stint into nuclear deterrence. It's usually there's a constructivist take on it too, but a realist favorite topic is nuclear weapons, and it's also sort of counterintuitive to many people who haven't really spent much time with it. Most realists would argue that nuclear weapons actually are defensive. You cannot really start a war. Well, you can start a war, but you will never win a war with it. And so realists would say, and I think there is a lot to it, that peace since World War II has basically been kept because of nuclear weapons, because the two superpowers, Russia, the Soviet Union, and the United States had the ability to annihilate each other, right? So there's a small club of nuclear powers in the world. It's officially India, Pakistan, China, Russia, the UK, France, the United States, and unofficially Israel. Am I correct here? Yeah.
North Korea.
North Korea. Yes. Thank you. I knew I was going to forget one. South Africa actually was a nuclear power and gave it up. Ukraine also had nuclear weapons stationed there and gave them up. The one person who said not to do that at the time was John Mearsheimer. He said that they would regret that because nuclear weapons make sure that you are not being invaded by a conventional army. And one important point is, and this is sort of a tricky part, it only works if you have a secure, they call it a secure second strike capability. That means like the Russians right now and the Americans, you have some submarines that you cannot really detect. And there's one, even if you attack, Russia attacks the United States with all it has, it can never be sure that the US cannot launch a second strike, a counterattack. And then the fatalities are just too big. So any rational person would never, ever do that. So the best way to play the game of nuclear deterrence is to come across as kind of crazy, right? But that's another story. So the attack on the Iranian facilities were obviously coordinated with Israel, and the goal was to make sure that Iran wouldn't develop nuclear weapons, because from a realist perspective, that's really, really bad. You want to keep that club at 8+1 members, basically. You want to prevent, and it's actually international law that there's not gonna, it's a nuclear non-proliferation treaty.
The story behind that.
What?
No, the story behind that's kind of funny. It was basically like in response, I think Italy and Switzerland trying to develop their own nuclear weapons, having their own nuclear programs. So,
okay,
like it's just like it'd be a comedy if it weren't so like actually deadly serious about like.
Yes, so there's the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which was also created or put in place by the superpowers, right? Because they want to be the most powerful ones and stay the most powerful ones. So Iran becoming another nuclear power was totally unacceptable to Israel anyways, because they're sort of mortal enemies. And the United States didn't like it either.
There's a counter to that, actually. Kenneth Waltz wrote an article.
Go.
Well, that Iran should have nuclear weapons, because we don't talk about world hegemony, but regional hegemony. So Iran, if it had nuclear weapons, would balance Israel. That's actually that's what Kenneth Waltz, who's a realist, has written. So you want, because then Israel will have its collection of allies in the region, which are not necessarily, like, it could be like Egypt, right? The first country, I want to say the first country to recognize Israel in the Arab world was Egypt. 1979, I think, or 81. Sadat gets killed kind of because of that. But maybe Israel forms alliances with other states in the region then to balance Iran. and then you get peace because everybody's scared,
Yeah.
right? That's a realist.
Yeah.
A realist maybe
Well,
would say
I
bombing
will
Iran is a big mistake. That's, I mean, that's one.
the problem with this is, yes, and we played this one out with Mearsheimer too, is what if Iran has a secure second strike capability, then that works. The problem is how to get there.
Yeah.
And if you're the United States and you see your job as sort of also creating some stability because you're benefiting from the world being stable, because that makes your job a lot easier and you benefit from all kinds of trade and whatnot, then you want to actually do this with the Israelis so that Israelis don't do it themselves.
Yeah,
because the most dangerous situation is the moment when you get the first 1 or 2 nuclear weapons and they know where they are, then they're going to take them out, and that could get really, really ugly. So yes, go Jason.
I was just say, like, Iran has like a long history of a nuclear program anyways. Like the Shah had his own, wanted to start the nuclear program, was dissuaded by the Americans. And like, I mean, from the Iranian point of view, I mean, look from their point of view, like we are like the heirs to the Persian Empire, right? Cyrus the Great, Darius, right? You know, like we had a landmass larger than the United States. Meanwhile, some like random dude in Korea has nukes. Why can't we have nukes? Right. And the threats have always come from the West, right? That's always been their, it's like, I mean, starting from Alexander the Great, the Arabs, the Ottomans, it's always come up from like, sort of like the Western side of the world. Like, and having nukes is just kind of like something that they're, I mean, I don't think even if we get like a new regime, like there's still going to be plans for nukes. Like, I just don't see that changing, just in the same way, like South Korea basically is like a quasi nuke state, right? Like, they're getting nuclear power subs from the United States. That's basically second strike capability. How long do you think it's going to take them to like wire up a nuke if they really feel like they need it?
I think there's a couple things to add. One thing is, I mean, I wonder how much Russia would want to help Iran. They're not really helping Iran, maybe because they're overcompromised. Russia could help them develop their nuclear program. The other thing I think, which is interesting, if we keep running with the theories and realism, I particularly talk about Iran and the region and everything, is that there's certain things that people tend to always talk about the Middle East, like religion and ethnicity, that don't matter, or really they matter very less. Like that there is Islam, and if there's a lot of countries that have, like, you know, the Islamic Republic of Iran or whatever, it doesn't matter that it's Islamic, right? It doesn't matter, and they're not Arab, but like Arabic countries, it doesn't matter about being Arab either. That's not a mobilizing device, either maybe internally, but not at the international level. What matters is state interests and security, period. Right? There's books written about this, like the Pan-Arab alliances, and you know, the 1960, you know, when Israel is formed, and all those wars, and how all those alliances break down because ideas don't, I mean, because those alliances, just because there's an Arab region doesn't mean that Arabs work together, right? And we see that internationally. That's why the nuclear balancing thing, like Iran will get its allies. Meanwhile, I mean, say, but Iran's not Arab, right? But we have, Iran could have allies. Israel could have allies with Arab states. Like I mentioned, Egypt could be a player. Qatar, I don't know. Like a bunch of states could actually enter an alliance with Israel. While their leaders may profess other things, or their populations may profess other things, right? That's some, I mean, another element here to think about. 2 elements, I should say.
Yes, I also have 2 points. First, while South Korea having nuclear subs, yes, Germany has nuclear weapons stationed on its territory, U.S. nuclear weapons, and we're going to get F-35s to deliver them. It might even be German pilots, but I think that's still a very big step away from being an actual nuclear state, because the U.S. can always pull it out whenever they want to, or disable it, which I'm sure they have some nice disabling device. But that's actually just the smaller point. One thing we haven't really talked about is, and that makes things very complicated, and I'm gonna go step out on thin ice here because it's such a hot topic, but that's what we want to do here as well, is the role of domestic politics in shaping international or foreign policy in general. Sort of realism a la John Mearsheimer doesn't care about domestic politics. There are other realists who very much do so. Randy Schweller, for example, or Fareed Zakaria. used to be one of the classical realists who do care about these different arenas, basically, where power matters. And when we're talking about Iran, I mean, we should also talk about what's been happening in the last sort of couple of weeks. We've seen the protests, and they were also largely or seem to have been instigated by sort of economic issues. All right, prices have been going up, and people have been talking about like, oh, we're spending all this time on a nuclear program, but then like the cost of living is going through the roof, and sort of this has been cited as one of the reasons. But obviously, there is a strong interest in, or strong group of people in the United States that has an interest in the fall of the Iranian regime right now, in general, even if it's not for geopolitical reasons. And Mearsheimer also wrote that book with Stephen Walt back in the day. They got a lot of heat for it. It's called The Israel Lobby. And basically, he says that Israel has very strong lobbies or lobbyists also in the United States, promoting the goals of the state of Israel, and that this was something to think about. I think they put it maybe a bit more strongly, but I think that's the way to say it. Other people have, and I'm gonna, get to this point right away because, well, whatever. People have accused them of anti-Semitism. I think that's just doesn't make much sense because it's not about some Jewish identity here or a problem of Jewish religion. It is a question of the Israeli state, and people like Stephen Walt and John Mearsheimer, they're all about the state, the power. It's kind of what Anthony was saying earlier. But I do think it is important to at least consider this argument. I mean, the Israel lobby, or whatever you want to call them, Israeli interests are very strong in the United States. And I don't actually, I mean, whether you see something wrong with this as Americans, that's one story. Israel is doing what it can. But I think it shows that Donald Trump actually is acutely aware of the power realities, not just globally, but also domestically, right? And he's obviously trying to balance them. It doesn't always work. And he's just only one dude. But I do think that the way US foreign policy has been handled in the last 6 months shows that doesn't show that he's just some crazy guy or some maniac or some bound on establishing an empire. Just like I don't believe that Vladimir Putin is some crazy maniac who wants to just establish some empire. They're both very, very well aware of the power realities that exist internationally and domestically. So that would be my take on Iran. Someone is.
I mean, if you want to run with try to run with I mean, I get the domestic politics angle. I mean, I think that's something that a lot of people have discussed. If you want to try to take a Marxist angle, perhaps you could, because I think something that the Trump administration has discussed is oil and natural gas, right? So you have that region, and oil exists in Iran and other places. And I think part of the Trump administration's oil and natural gas program, for lack of better terms, is to increase supply to the point that you actually have a decrease in inflation. Like that's something that the quote in the United States, it's like affordability agenda, and it's floating around. And Republicans are getting a lot of heat for it. And when Trump was elected, he said he's going to bring prices down. And one of his pillars was to lower energy prices. And he wants oil. I mean, if he can make oil like essentially what it was in 1910 and 1920, where people almost, gas was a nickel. I mean, that wouldn't happen now. But if he could drop oil prices even lower than they are now, he would try to maybe mark that up as his approach, or the Republican approach, to the affordability agenda. And they are, yes, working with Saudi Arabia and OPEC, but OPEC has lost a lot of power in the world in terms of OPEC supplies, I don't know what percentage of oil to particularly to U.S. markets, but it used to be higher. Now it's not that much anymore. And the U.S. now produces its own oil and exports it. But if we can keep getting supply, we can then keep dropping prices, and that could factor into affordability. So that may be part of the reason economic motives to get involved in Iran.
And I'd say also like it has like the added benefit of like kneecapping your kind of adversaries. Like we'll go to Venezuela later, I assume, but like if you can take, because like right now China benefits a lot from getting like cheap oil from Iran and Venezuela. They can we can get rid of that, right? We indirectly kneecap Russia. And I guess the only other thing I would say is like from like the sort of Trumpian view of like allies and foreign policy, right? Like Israel, Turkey, even South Korea, those are the kind of allies that we want to have, right? Like fundamentally, because it's like Israel basically, I mean, yes, they have a lobby and whatnot, but even like Israel is kind of aware of like the pushback it's getting. Like Netanyahu, I don't know, it was on the media a lot, but like Netanyahu recently proposed that like in about a decade or so, Israel wants to be off of American aid. Like they're no longer just doing like American military aid. They want to do joint investments, right? And those are the kind of allies that Trump wants. Where like Turkey's like, you know what, we'll handle Syria, right? You know what, we'll deal with ISIS, we'll do all of that. You don't worry about that, right? We just need your backing. We need some F-35s, you know, maybe those sorts of things. And South Korea as well, right? They come to America and they say, okay, we'll invest in your shipyards, right? We just need you to like, you know, back us up here and here. And like, yeah, we have a spat of tariffs, but like, we'll figure it out as we always do. It's more of like a gentle reminder that like, hey, you haven't passed a bill in Parliament. Make it happen before the Supreme Court overturns my tariff rules and we're back to square one.
But would you generally agree with the assessment of Anthony? Because, I mean, you're watching that kind of about energy prices.
So I would say like, okay, so like Basant, like the Secretary of Treasury said like there were 3 goals, right? 3% deficit, 3% GDP growth, and 3 million barrels a day. Ironically, with the thing in Venezuela, we're technically part of OPEC. The United States is now technically part of OPEC. But like, I think the bigger issue is that like we are increasing the cost because it's the Venezuelan crude is like, I guess not to get the weeds of it, but it's what we call sour crude. So it's like fairly crappy and hard to refine. And like American refiners are some of the best in the world because like for a long time, that was where we refined our crude before the shale revolution. And that kind of requires a lot of processing. So the main processors are basically like United States, China, and Singapore. And I suspect that like if we kind of like, depending on how we restrict the supply of oil, right, China's no longer going to get those sweetheart deals. And those refiners that they built there are also going to be like kind of like a cost. So it's not clear to me like how much of an effect that's going to have on the market. Like, because we already produce a lot of oil, right? And Saudi needs to produce more oil, both to fund like MBS's views of like the Neon line and all his other various projects. So it's like, the problem is like, I don't know what effect like this kind of raid on the shadow fleet is, which is another, I guess, thing we can talk about Realpolitik or like, you know, because the Europeans are getting in on the action too, right? For the first time in basically 4 years.
Okay, well then let's, yeah, I mean, we're already there basically. We left the Middle East or that region and are in South America, Venezuela. Does anybody, I mean, want to go with the imperialists? I mean, this is how I started thinking about it, because there was a very clear sort of argument in Der Spiegel. I thought it was bad. We said we don't talk about other people, but I will. It was just a hook basically to get the argument going, which was like, yes, the United States invaded, and other people said that too, Venezuela because of all the oil. And it just didn't make that much sense to me, because yes, I know the US is essentially an energy self-sufficient, but it also gets most of its like oil from Canada and then some from Mexico. So I thought there's a different story behind it. There's a different rationale there. I do see the point, but I don't know enough about economics or global, especially global economics. How lowering the price of oil in general around the world might serve Donald Trump's agenda of lowering prices, which is the one thing he has a really tough time getting done. But to me, it was always a more realist explanation there for Venezuela. But why don't you go first, you guys, and then I'll drop mine.
But the imperialist view, you want like
No, and what
Yeah.
do you think? Like, just your view.
I mean, I think like from the like I guess if I were to like obviously I'm not part of the Trump administration, but like I think their argument would be like, look, like Venezuela is a hotbed for literally all adversaries, the Chinese, the Russians, even Hezbollah, right? Like like the drug cartel thing. I mean, like I don't think like Venezuela is producing the drugs, but I also don't think they were necessarily like doing their best to crack down on it. So like from their point of view, like okay, how do we do this so we don't have like an Iraq situation, right? We'll just do like involuntary immigration policy, I guess. Is that what, I don't know if you call it that, but you grab Maduro, you throw him over there, and you say, hey, you know, like we need to stop doing these things, right? Or we're going to do it again. Right? And that serves like again a multi-factor. Like one is like China is no longer getting $40 in oil or you know whatever they're paying for a barrel of oil, right? It's definitely below market rates. Two, it's like you can say, yeah, again, like by cramping down on those like the shadow fleet, Venezuela shadow fleet, you also give the okay to like, I mean, the Europeans are starting to crack down on it too, right? They're like, okay, well, it's open game now, right? But like, this is not new to America, right? Obviously, the Monroe Doctrine's been around for a while, and like, I mean, like the whole Chiquita Banana thing, right? You know, we would just literally go in and say like, hey, you steal money from our businesses, right? This is like 19th century stuff where we were just saying that like you stole money from Chevron, you nationalized our company, so we're coming back and taking what's ours, right? And you know we're not gonna send in the Marines, but we are gonna like you know make sure that you pay attention and do what we want you to do.
Anthony.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I don't know if it's like Trump did say oil, and there's rare earth metals apparently also in Venezuela. I mean, so like I feel like the kneecapping ally or adversaries argument is also compelling. Besides acquiring resources, there's also a way that Venezuela is super vulnerable. Like there's a lot of potential adversaries in the region, Cuba, Mexico, or not Mexico, not an adversary, but like Trump has made threatening gestures to Mexico with tariffs and so on. In Venezuela, like Maduro is not popularly elected. I mean, the election that took place in 2024, it looks like he lost. He's like essentially created his own parliament. I mean, so if there's anyone in the region or even in the world who Trump could like take out and make an example of, it's Maduro was a great example. So that vulnerability and it sends a message, and like now the U.S. can say to Mexico, like we may bomb fentanyl factories. They said that a year or two ago. People were like, yeah, whatever. Now people are thinking, oh, maybe they will. Maybe they would do that. And then that allows, I think one theme, I mean, this is not really a theory discussion or concept, but it's one thing I think is consistent with Trump is leverage. People talk about this in the press too, but he exerts power by either exploiting leverages or trying to create situations where there is leverage. So look, it was honestly, when I was watching the press conference with Trump the day after the invasion or action in Venezuela, he said, we're there for the oil and we're going to run the country. And I was like, oh, damn, that makes a lot of sense. Because it's not regime change. He's going to take somebody out and then he's going to say, basically, he's like, I'm going to run it. And I have the power. I can make threats and you're going to listen to what I say. And there's so much, even with immigration policy within the United States, like immigrants have no political voice in the United States. It's leverage. He can use immigrants and use enforcement, use the violence to intimidate others and to get his way. There's this point of leverage, force and leverage, which is consistent. But he has to back it up with actually doing things like bombing in Iran, right? And Venezuela, right? That point is key. Then he can say stuff about Greenland. And people are like, oh my gosh, if he did this in Venezuela, is he going to do this in Greenland, right? That's not really a theory discussion. That almost gets back to the Trump is an amazing individual discussion.
But the idea is still there, right? And I think like it also serves like there's the secondary signaling mechanism you said is like this is a second or third time probably where like so-called like like Russia defense guarantees and China defense guarantees are like, is the United States unreliable? Yes. Oh, but the thing is like we're not competing against like Superman here. We're competing against China and Russia, right? You look at Assad, you look at what happened to Venezuela, right? Like you look what happened to Iran, right? Like when we bombed Iran, like Russia and China were basically like, yeah, hey, thoughts and prayers. And that in and of itself is a signaling mechanism, right? That like, hey, like, you know, like we will move our asses to defend Israel, right? Are China and Russia going to do that for you? Like, how reliable are you? And this may matter more for like if you're like in the say this, you know, sub-Saharan Africa and the Sahel, where you're inviting all these Wagner guys, and you're thinking like, okay, wait, how reliable are these? Like, are the Russian promises of safety?
Yeah.
Defense.
Well, I think what you said, Anthony, is really sort of the key. This was the ideal place to make an example, right? I had discussions with people who were like getting infuriated. It's like, how can the United States do this? And I was like, well, the Monroe Doctrine. Maybe we should explain it. From 1823 something.
Yeah, like, I think that's right. 13 or 23.
Yeah. And some Trump officials said like, oh, we're doing the Monroe Doctrine.
We got to do it, right?
This goes back to the earlier thing about the stopping power of water, right? This is why Mershon came up with it. It's like, it's no problem. Anybody who's an ocean away is not really a problem because you have nuclear weapons. But anybody who's putting down their foot in South America is a serious problem from a realist perspective for the United States. And it is unacceptable when it's a superpower or another great power, right? And in this case, China has been that great power trying to put its foot down in South America. So what people have been infuriated about was how they start like, you know, doing all these wars, and now they're like deposing people. And to that I said, well, the United States has always been doing that in the region, in South America, Latin America. It's just been usually done with the CIA. It's been covert operations, and then afterwards everybody was like, oh, it wasn't us, but everybody knew it was them. And I think that the way it was done is very illuminating. Right? This was supposed to send a signal, a very clear signal. This was like a super well orchestrated, very impressive. Yes, it was like the killing of Osama bin Laden, right? They fly in, of course, things go. I mean, it's a movie right there.
Yeah.
Right? They're all thinking Hollywood, especially Trump. I think.
Well, I mean, this was like insane how like basically what they did.
But so I think my first thing would be, this was a clear signal to China, but it was basically so perfect because so many things came together. You had the bombing of those or the shooting down of those narco boats in the ocean, right? They're televised, and then you have again your domestic audience, right? The people who are watching that, who are like in the Midwest and having like entire communities devastated by drugs, right? And they see how they like shoot these guys out of the water with their speedboats, and they're just like, yes, man, you're awesome, right? That's another story. You can make the case that the people who bring the drugs also bring the people, and then you can again appeal to your base and be like, hey, we're doing something against illegal immigration. And you also send a signal not just to China, but you did send a signal to Mexico, right? And what happened, like I think just like a couple of days ago, it was in the Wall Street Journal, like, oh, Mexico just delivered like a bunch of cartel leaders to the United States, because the president was probably like, maybe I should like try to make a gesture here and show that we're taking this more seriously, because let's face it, that is a real issue, and the Mexico border is a real issue in the United States in any discussion, right? So yes, and you can also not dump the fentanyl there. But I think the key point here was, yeah, it was supposed to be seen, just like the Iran thing. It was supposed to be seen. It was a big signal to China. Iran as well. It's like, look what we can do. Remember what a big deal they made out of these bunker buster bombs? They're like, we're the only ones who have them, and there's only 15. We still have, I don't know, 7. Get ready, guys. Right? So, I mean, this is really not funny, but it's kind of comical in a way because the again, the outrage that sometimes goes through the press when these things happen completely distracts from what's actually going on. This is, I think, the most fascinating thing. And speaking of which, and because I don't want us to go over an hour, or at least not a lot, I think we're going to not skip Ukraine. We're going to talk about Ukraine, Russia again in the future. But I think let's move to our last region, basically, and postpone our discussion of Ukraine and talk about Greenland. Who wants to go first?
I mean, from the realist point of view, like Greenland is like they're actually essential to the United States, like from a strategic point of view. Because you think about it, right? Like you have Greenland, Iceland, UK. If you're a Russian submarine, and especially the Arctic melting, there's like that small gap is where they get through. And more importantly than that, like as we move towards a more space-based kind of like environment, right? Having satellites in Greenland is really, really important because one, that's where the ICBMs travel just because of trajectories and whatnot. And two, like that gives you the lowest latency between your ground-based communications and the actual satellite. So if you ever want to actually talk to your satellites, you need military bases there. So like that, I think, is sort of the fundamental strategic argument. Now you could argue that maybe the approach that we're doing of yelling at our allies and treating them like redheaded stepchildren, maybe not the best, but like the rationale is there, right? And like I don't think the EU did itself any favors when they sent like a half dozen or a dozen troops. I know it was pre-planned like many times before, but probably would have been better off to like push that back and kind of like do something else. But
the bases are there. And that's the thing. Is like there's something else about like the bases are not inventing them. They're already there. So it's the question is like why do they want to own it? Like why do they want to actually make it into part of the United States? Like that's the part is it his negotiating style to take the maximalist position, or is it, I mean, it'd be easier perhaps if you owned it. If it was a state, then you would have like U.S. laws about extracting resources and stuff would apply, and maybe it'd be simpler to take even though it's apparently, I don't know, I'm not a Greenland expert, but apparently it's very difficult to extract the resources that are there. But again, maybe in 20, 30 years, it'll be easier with climate change and so on going on. But I think that in terms of like an economics argument, like that's perhaps there's advantages to companies that are, because I know the U.S. right now, because of China, but because of rare earth minerals, they're engaging in recycling. They're looking for minerals in places like Venezuela, but also within the United States. And so if there are rare earth minerals for our tech stuff, like they're going to really want to find those. And if Greenland has them, they may say, right, not now we're going to mine for them, but maybe in 20 years we will. So, and then those companies are probably very interested in that.
Yeah. Yeah, I also wonder about why it's so important to own them. I totally agree with Jason on the strategic importance, and I think it is important to actually talk about it, because a lot of people just totally try to ignore that aspect. The ICBM, so the intercontinental ballistic missiles, from Russia do travel, basically all of them, across Greenland. And there's the early warning system of the United States is basically on the eastern coast of Canada or Alaska and all these areas. So there's a clear strategic significance. Yes, but I also don't get why he needs to own it. In terms of the negotiation strategy, I find it, yes, I have to say it, I find it hilarious how everybody's always falling for the same thing with Donald Trump. It's so simple. It's like negotiating for dummies 101 or something. I don't get it. Like he always asks for like 200%. Everybody freaks out. They're all scared shitless. And then when they're like basically preparing for the invasion, he's like, "Oh, I just take 100. It's fine."
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree with that.
We've been doing this, for like, God, how many years now? And we're still
so I mean, this is the one point where I gotta say Trump is not only one dude. He is one special, and I mean,
Yeah.
very, I mean, ballsy. I gotta say it, like, it's crazy how he's just doing this and thinking he gets away with it. Then he does it, and he does get away with it. And we're all like, I mean, the media, politicians, the public, we're all like, oh my God, I was like, oh God, what is he going to do? Is it war? Is NATO over? And I was like, wait a second, think for a moment, Tim.
Yeah.
That makes
Greatest
no-
show on earth, right? Like, but
Yeah.
I mean, I think like this is like for the first time in a very long time, we're just unvarnished American power, right? We're the only country that has like such massive expeditionary capabilities, and like I think like maybe I don't again, this is more of the mind reading side of things, but like when I look at like the British deal the Chagos Islands, like how I don't know if they're still happening or not, but they're going to return the islands to the islanders, or like basically have to declare it independent. Like, and I think I don't know if Trump saw that, but I think Trump wants something like we have in Guantanamo, right? Where it's basically this is U.S. sovereign territory, right? We want to build bases, we can build, because we had bases back in like the 50s or so, right? Then I think it was Carter, or I can't remember if it was Carter or somebody else, but basically said like, okay, we'll give it back to Denmark. And I think my guess like would be that like at the end conclusion is going to be some sort of situation where it's like we'll get like this chunk of land in Greenland where we can build whatever the hell we want base wise. We don't have to go to the Denmark or whatever to get approval, or maybe the Europeans pour a bunch more defense to do it, which, you know, again, like also works for Trump, I think.
Yes, I think a couple of things, and I think I'm going to use this as sort of the concluding thoughts for this discussion, is there are also limits to U.S. power, right? So I think in the end, if you have the basis and you don't own it, because I think Trump also, for prestige reasons, and he's only a dude in that sense, in the double meaning of the word dude, just like he wants it to be the Gulf of America. And he also might want to go down in history as the president who enlarged the territory of the United States by a big chunk, biggest island in the world, right? So that might be, but at the same time, again, there are limits, even to U.S. power. And I when I thought again, is he going to jeopardize NATO? I was like, he doesn't really care, but you don't pick a fight with NATO members, right? So there's one line. The other limit or line, or where you see the limits, is Iran. Right, there was a moment when he was making some grand gesture like, "Oh, help is on its way," and then basically his military, the Joint Chiefs, told him like, "Hey, buddy, we still have all these guys in the South America theater, so we don't actually have enough firepower to do Iran," which is the limit of the expeditionary forces, right? Even the United States. I mean, Iran is a big country with very capable military forces. So there, even Trump then backed down, which kind of is reassuring, I think, in some sense, because he is. I haven't seen any sign yet that he is really that maniac who's just like going, you know, is going to commit suicide for the sake of Greenland. But yes, it is something, and I think it's always good to keep in mind as well the limits of power. So, any final thoughts?
Yeah, we are moving carrier groups to Iran, so hopefully this won't age poor. Yeah.
Sorry?
We are moving carrier group. The air carrier groups are arriving now, so it's going to be like,
yes,
it's another one of those game of chicken, right? Like, is he going to? Stay tuned.
Yes. Well, there is a chance that we might see things happening in Iran. Well, things are happening. We don't see as much anymore because they're basically cutting off all internet access. So I think that's actually an appropriate thing to say to conclude our discussion for today. Is our hearts go out to the people of Iran, and we hope there's not going to be any more bloodshed. And aside from that, thank you all for joining us. I think this was a fantastic discussion. We look forward to have you here at the forum for our next one, coming next month on U.S. domestic politics with a focus on immigration and the actions of ICE. Thank you.